Hello and happy February, everyone. It is pouring down rain outside right now, and that's supposed to turn to snow tonight, and we're due for a big winter storm tomorrow. So I thought it would be a great time to try winter sowing. Now, I've had a lot of folks recently ask me if I winter sow my seeds, and I have never tried it. Now, this method makes complete sense to me for starting things like native perennials, but I'm really curious to see how it will work for starting some of my cold hardy vegetables. If you have not heard of winter sowing before, the basic concept is that you are starting seeds in clear plastic containers or semi-transparent plastic containers, creating essentially a mini greenhouse environment that you will then put outdoors in the winter, and the seeds will essentially know when it is the best time for them to germinate. Now, there are quite a few supposed advantages to using this technique. The first, and it's a big one, is that there is no need for grow lights or taking up space in your home for seed starting. I know I've had a lot of questions from folks asking me what they should do if they can't afford grow lights, they don't have grow lights. I think that this winter sowing would be a great alternative to having a grow light set up in your home. The second big advantage is that you can essentially leave these unattended. So I've heard from people that they want to start seeds, but maybe they're on vacation or they go to Florida for the winter and they're not going to be around. This is a method that you can use to sow your seeds, stick them outdoors, basically forget them until the spring comes. There is one exception to that, and that is if you happen to have a particularly dry winter where you're just not getting precipitation in the form of snow or rain. And in that case, you may need to water these guys a couple of times. But in an average winter, at least here in my Zone 6 Ohio area, we typically get enough precipitation through the winter that these guys can be left completely alone. Another advantage is that the natural freeze-thaw cycle that's going to happen in the soil inside of these during the course of the winter will help break down tough seed coatings. So sometimes you'll have, especially again, native perennials that require scarification, or you need to scratch or file the seed coat so that they can germinate. The natural freeze-thaw cycle will kind of do that on its own. It'll help loosen and break that seed coating. Related to that, this works really well for varieties that need a period of cold stratification. So that's just a period of time in cold temperatures that signals to the seed that it is time to germinate. And again, a lot of native perennial type plants require that. And when you're not doing these outdoors, an alternative is to pop them in your fridge or your freezer for 2 to 6 weeks or whatever that required cold period is. But this kind of takes care of all of that for you. This method also allows the seed to essentially decide when the right time to germinate is. So based on the temperatures, the moisture, the amount of sunlight it's receiving, seeds are going to know, okay, now it is a good time to pop out of the ground. And so you're giving them that advantage versus forcing them in the house to start at a time that may be unnatural for them. Now, as I've said, I've not tried this before. And while allowing a seed to germinate on its own terms absolutely makes sense to me, I do have some concern with the timing. So for many of my cold hardy crops, so think things like broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, kale, those types of things, I am starting them indoors in February so that I can have seedlings ready to transplant in very early April. That allows me to get a harvest before the heat of the summer sets in, which those plants really do not like. So what I'm really curious to find out with this method is if this same thing allows me to get a harvest before those hot days of summer set in and really ruin my crop. So that'll be a really interesting thing to find out here with this experiment. And a final advantage is that these seedlings are not going to require the amount of hardening off that a seedling that you're taking from indoors or from a greenhouse out to the garden is going to require. So they have been out in the cold, in the elements for their entire lifespan. So just by default, they're going to be a tougher, hardier plant than something that you're bringing from your nice, climate controlled 70-degree home into the outdoors. And as you may have guessed, this technique tends to work best with seeds that are cold hardy or require a period of cold stratification. So if you're checking out seed packets in the store and want to try this technique, just look for keywords like frost tolerant, cold hardy, needs pre-chilled, best started in the fall, those types of things, because those are going to be great items to start out with. Now, another advantage that I guess I forgot to mention is that this is a relatively low cost way to start seeds, especially to start a lot of seeds if you have a large quantity. Looking at basic supplies for doing winter sowing, you're going to need containers of some kind. A very popular choice seems to be the gallon milk jugs. We didn't have any of those. My mother-in-law saves all their half gallons, so that's what I'm using today. But you can also use things like the clear containers that fruits and vegetables come in, those salad containers that you get pre-washed salad greens from the grocery store. Basically, all you're going to want to look for is something that is clear or at least partially translucent, something that you're going to be able to either open up the top or poke holes in the top as well as the bottom for drainage, and that it's going to be large enough and tall enough to fit whatever kind of seedlings that you are growing. So basically this part of it is free. You can pull whatever you can find out of the recycling or ask friends and neighbors if they'll save some plastic containers for you. So you're saving a big expense right there with not having to buy seedling containers. The next thing you'll need is duct tape. I didn't have any, so I'm using Gorilla Tape. Something to mark your plants with, so some labels, a permanent marker, and then your potting medium and your seeds. And that's really all there is to it. First step is to wash all of your containers with hot soapy water. They shouldn't require any special kind of disinfecting. Soapy water will work just fine. Get them rinsed out really well. And then you're going to want to poke drainage holes in the bottom. The recommendation that I've seen is 5 to 6 holes per gallon container. So in this half gallon, I'm going to poke, I think 4 holes in the bottom of these. And no matter what kind of container you use, you absolutely have to have drainage holes in the bottom. That is key for getting this to work. The next step is to cut a slit in your container about halfway up, and you're going to want to leave a small hinge of material. And this is so that you can essentially open up your container when the days get warm and sunny and let your little mini greenhouse vent, but then close it up again if the temperatures drop. And then you'll remove the lids. Now for salad containers and things like that, if they don't have holes in the top, you'll want to cut a few holes in the top of those lids. And that is to ensure that the precipitation can get into your containers. Next, you want to be sure to label your plants and just be sure to choose something that's going to withstand the winter weather. So I am using these little plant tags, writing on them with permanent marker, and I'm going to stick these inside of my containers when I plant them. That way they'll be protected from the elements. And when I open these up in the spring, I can tell what I have planted. Next, add 3 to 6 inches of potting soil or potting medium, depending on the size of your container, and moisten that soil well. Now, in terms of what type of medium to use, anything that you would typically use for seed starting will work well for this application. Just think loose, fluffy, and really well draining. Those are the key things to look for in whatever medium you choose. And today I'm just using this Pro Mix Ultimate Organic Mix. This is something that I often go to when I'm in a hurry for seed starting, and it works really well for that. So it should work well for this winter sowing. And now it's time to sow seeds. So I've got a mix of a whole bunch of stuff. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get all of this planted, but I've got broccoli, cauliflower, leafy greens like lettuce, chard, and kale. I've got a couple herbs in here I'm going to try out, some wild thyme, some chamomile, some echinacea, some green onions. I think that's it. I basically grabbed an assortment of cold hardy vegetables so that I can get a good picture of what works well and what perhaps doesn't. And depending on the seed that you're sowing, sow them on top of your medium and then either lightly cover with soil or just tamp them into the soil surface. There are some seeds that don't require covering at all. I'm going to give that another mist just to make sure that the seeds are thoroughly moistened. I'm going to stick my label in here, and then it's time to close up the container. So I'm just going to tape shut where I had this cut open so that this does not get disrupted through the winter. And now it's time to put my little greenhouses outside. It's best to choose a sunny but somewhat protected area. You want to be protected from strong winds so these things aren't blowing over. You also want to be protected from any curious animals that might want to get into these. I know that with my dogs, if I let these out in a spot that they could get a hold of them, these would be ripped to shreds in about 2 days. So I'm actually going to put these out in one of my raised beds out in the garden because they will be sitting down in kind of a protected spot. The other thing to keep in mind is that you don't want to choose a location that is under an overhang because you want to make sure that these containers are able to get precipitation into the tops of them. And then one last word on timing. From what I have read, the general recommendation for doing winter sowing is to start seeds anytime after the winter solstice, after those days start to get a little longer, up through March, depending on what you are sowing. Now, some of those native perennials are going to take a really, really long time. So you want to check in particular if they have a cold stratification period, how long that is, and perhaps get those started even earlier. But for most of the veggies, annual things like that, starting anytime up through March is pretty safe. Once the warmer days of spring start to happen, we're going to want to check these more frequently because as soon as the seeds germinate and I start to get some green growth in these containers, I want to keep a really close eye on them. So I don't know what your springs are like, but here in Ohio, we can go from sunny and 75 degrees to 35 and snowing in a matter of 2 days. And what I'm going to want to watch for is that on those sunny 60, 70 degree days in the early spring that I'm getting out and venting these little greenhouses. So to do that, I'm just going to take the tape off, flip those covers off, and let these guys breathe. And then when the temperatures get cold again, I can put the covers back on to protect my young seedlings. Eventually, as that weather starts to even out, I can completely take these tops off and really allow those seedlings to acclimate and harden off and get ready for transplanting. After that, anytime your seedlings are of the desired size, you can go ahead and transplant these out in their final growing location. So now I've got these all set outside. I'm just gonna wait a couple months and eagerly watch for my little green seedlings to emerge. Be sure to subscribe to catch an update because I will be sharing how my winter sowing experiment went here in a couple of months. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.